This is Daily Armenia, CivilNet's daily news digest. Here's what's making headlines in Armenia today. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan said in Parliament yesterday that all technical specifications for the so-called Trump route must be finalized by the end of this year, with construction expected to begin in the second half of 2026. The railway link will follow the same route that it did during the Soviet era. The gas pipeline will pass north of it, Pashinyan said, adding that the final decision on the elements of the project have not been decided, but that it will also include a highway and most likely an oil pipeline and power lines. On paper, everything looks simple, but the terrain has its own specifics, he added. Deputy Prime Minister Maher Grigoryan also addressed the project in Parliament, saying there might be extraordinary activity related to the demarcation of the border with Azerbaijan in the Syunik region if required for the construction of infrastructure for the Trump route. There may be certain sections that will require urgent delimitation to facilitate TRIP's infrastructure development, Grigoryan said, adding that the broader delimitation process would continue regardless. The Trump Route for International Peace and Prosperity, or TRIP, is a proposed transport corridor intended to connect Azerbaijan with its Nakhichevan exclave through Armenia's southern Syunik province. Baku has sought such a connection for decades, and the project was agreed upon in August during a meeting between the Armenian and Azerbaijani leaders at the White House in Washington, D.C. Under the agreement, the United States will act as a third party with the route operated by a joint Armenian-American venture. While Washington has not pledged to deploy military personnel, its expected economic role in overseeing and operating the corridor is widely viewed as a safeguard against renewed conflict in the region. Armenian law enforcement arrested and charged two opposition-aligned commentators today after a podcast episode in which they used offensive language and allegedly issued threats targeting Alen Simonyan, the country's parliamentary speaker. Narek Samsonyan and Vazgen Saghatelyan, hosts of the Imnem Nimi podcast, were detained by National Security Service officers, according to their lawyers. They were taken to the investigative committee for questioning. Their November 10th episode included harsh insults directed at Simonyan. The speaker filed a formal complaint, saying the broadcast went beyond swearing and mockery and contained explicit threats that required a criminal review. I couldn't avoid filing a report. If there is a threat, what else should I do? Simonyan told reporters. Anyone who engages in hooliganism or issues threats will be held accountable by law. Following their interrogations, the investigative committee charged both Samsonyan and Saghatelyan with hooliganism, their lawyer Ruben Melikian said, adding that prosecutors plan to request pretrial detention. Hooliganism charges in Armenia can carry a prison sentence. Simonyan is also pursuing a civil claim against Saghatelyan, demanding roughly $5,000 in damages and a public apology. And finally, the CivilNet number of the day is 12.4. That's the Schengen visa refusal rate in Armenia as of last year, according to the European Union's statistical agency, Eurostat. Armenian nationals must currently apply in advance to enter the EU, a process often described as lengthy, expensive, and unpredictable. Even approved applications require extensive documentation and long waiting periods. However, this may change. Earlier this month, the EU handed Armenia a visa liberalization roadmap, a set of conditions that, once fulfilled, would allow Armenians to travel visa-free to Europe. The requirements are largely technical, but will involve significant legislative and enforcement reforms in areas such as border management, migration control, and asylum policy. And as always, please follow CivilNet for the latest news and independent reporting from our contributors on the ground here in Armenia.